started in February of 2022.
Through the use of satellite imagery, we were able to determine that the Virgo loaded from Kharg Island, Iran.
UANI is very specialized. It looks in detail, in granular detail, at the activities of tankers like the Virgo, which are known to be shipping Iranian oil.
It showed the exceptional work being done by United Against Nuclear Iran in its tanker tracking.
We've been tracking tankers and been involved in the seizure of tankers well before the Suez Rajan. The Suez Rajan became particularly important because it was laden with nearly 1 million barrels of oil, which is a lot of money of smuggled oil.
UANI's Iran tanker tracking program is to prevent the regime from conducting its illicit shipments and acquiring revenue from this type of activity is the purpose of this program.
A tanker named Suez Rajan was transporting a cargo load of oil.
Was suspected of bringing Iranian oil which would violate EU
The U.S. appears
sanctions.
to be offloading a multi-million-dollar shipment of what's believed to be seized Iranian oil from a tanker in the Gulf.
There were a number of different news outlets that reported on the Suez Rajan taking Iranian oil. AP, the Associated Press, was the first one to break the story on February 17th, 2022. Reuters followed up later. Lloyd's List Intelligence was another one.
Lloyd's List covered the story about the Suez Rajan based on the information that UANI had provided. When UANI reported the ship-to-ship transfers that had been undertaken between a tanker called the Virgo, which was carrying Iranian oil, and the Suez Rajan, which was going to be transferred this Iranian oil.
This is the satellite imagery showing the Virgo taking on Iranian oil. In the right-hand corner, we have what's called a reference shot, and that's a satellite image of the vessel where we deem its location to be accurate. You've got the Virgo directly loading from the port. We then continue to follow the vessel to its final destination. So the Virgo then went from the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and it sailed all the way down past Sri Lanka, ultimately through the straits here. That was an indicator to us that the vessel might be involved in spoofing or manipulating its transponder. And that's when the ship-to-ship transfer occurred.
Tonight, tensions between the U.S. and Iran could be escalating.
The U.S. has requested the right to seize an Iranian oil tanker.
So we embarked upon an aggressive campaign to immediately target the industry around that vessel.
I'm not quite confident that it received enough coverage in mainstream media, but nonetheless the coverage was sufficient to result in some sort of policy move forward.
Serious actions that are going on through the Middle East, we decided to find out where the oil was coming from and how it was transiting, and that's when we became aware of the Suez Rajan.
We said, okay, we have to hit each lever of potential pressure on that vessel.
We began our letter to the owners and operators of the vessel.
Fleetscape was the ultimate beneficial owner of the Suez Rajan, and they are a hedge fund. Oak Tree Capital is the related entity based in California to that fund, and together they were in some way providing finance to the operators and the commercial operators of the Suez Rajan, which was a Greek-based company called Empire Navigation.
A few days after the news was published, Oak Tree and Fleetscape announced an investigation into our allegations of the vessel.
Because of the intensity of our calls to action against them, the owners and operators had no recourse other than to respond.
We have sanctions in place. We can't just talk the talk, we literally have to walk the walk. And that means you put sanctions out there, we do have to take then the oil that is being transmitted by Iran.
And unless you stop this, the Islamic Republic is able to obtain a massive amount of revenue, which it uses to sustain the oppression of its own people, its malign regional adventurism, and and feather the pockets of its leadership.
The ship became frozen in place. It was anchored in a place called the Roule archipelago, where it was stopped pending what happens next in the seizure proceeding.
Is a Sabah Navy patrol boat. If you obey, you will be safe.
This video that you see right now is of yet another incident overseas involving Iran and one of our ships.
You are ordered to not interfere in my operation.
Iranian Revolutionary Guard vessels harassed our destroyer, the USS Nitz, yesterday near the Strait of Hormuz.
When the IRGC and the Islamic Republic found out about the seizure of the oil on the Suez Rajan, initially their reaction was to threaten those involved. They threatened to take action on vessels in the Persian Gulf.
Revolutionary Guard rhetoric following the action taken against the Suez Rajan was quite bellicose. At the same time, such rhetoric is usually quite bellicose.
In response to a number of recent alarming events in the Strait of Hormuz, the Secretary of Defense has ordered the deployment of the destroyer USS Thomas Hudner, F-35 fighters, and F-16 fighters to the U.S. Central Command Area of Responsibility to defend U.S. interests and safeguard freedom of navigation in the region.
There are a number of us in the United States Senate. When it comes to national security and the security of our friends, we see this as an issue that can bring us together.
I am very excited to announce the first bipartisan, bicameral legislative effort since the formation of the Abraham Accords Caucus.
So you need a bipartisan approach that gives a strategic clarity and a strategic consistency to U.S. policy so that, in essence, the leaders of the Islamic Republic don't think there is a weakness or a flaw in our political decision-making that they can exploit through pressure and therefore outlast us.
The sanctions that were imposed on July 7 in 2022 are certainly, a step forward. And there have been subsequently, more vessels have been designated, and there have been, more action has been taken against vessels that are engaged in shipping Iranian oil.
But as many of you know, Iran has continued to threaten our allies and partners in the region through the use of proxy forces targeting innocent civilians.
So what we saw, the Iranians were harassing shipping, threatening shipping, hijacking shipping, and the Biden administration, rightly so, began to place more sanctions on Iran.
White House announces new sanctions against Iran.
The U.S. is set to announce new sanctions against Iran.
The United States says that it will punish Iran with new sanctions.
So there's a lot to talk about today. Needless to say, Iran is a big part of the focus.
From April 2002 to April 2023, there were relatively few updates regarding the Suez Rajan in the public.
The seizure proceeding surrounding the Suez Rajan took the better part of a year to take place, the investigation.
Vessel specifically remained anchored in waters off the coast of Singapore and Malaysia. It sat there for almost that entire time, wait for its next moves.
We turn now to the Middle East. The U.S. is imposing a new round of sanctions on Iran.
The U.S. Department of Justice has applied to seize the Iranian oil tanker.
On April 2023, District Court of Columbia filed under seal its complaint. It details Iran's the Islamic Republic of Iran's Revolutionary Guard's connections to the oil industry and how they are a terrorist organization, which gave the U.S. Department of Justice the rights to claim the oil on the Suez Rajan.
On April 2023, the U.S. government did a civil forfeiture of the cargo on board the Suez Rajan, which resulted in it sailing to Houston.
On April 6th, that's when its transition to the Gulf of Mexico began. You can see its pass track here. It goes all the way through the straits there. Shortly after passing South Africa on May 2nd, we see its transponder come back on. And then the vessel continued all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, where it ultimately anchored off of Galveston on May 30th, 2023.
The U.S. appears to be offloading a multi-million-dollar shipment of what's believed to be seized Iranian oil from a tanker in the Gulf.
The Suez Rajan finally began offloading its cargo of Iranian oil in the U.S.
In August, the Mr. Euphrates, it assisted in the ship-to-ship transfer and offloading of the Iranian oil, and the Suez Rajan's tracks overlap to indicate that the ship-to-ship transfer began.
This was extremely important because it resulted in the first criminal prosecution of a ship owner for their involvement in shipping Iranian oil.
The Suez Rajan drama began when we identified it in 2022, ultimately to the unsealing of the indictment and the offloading of oil in Galveston. So I made several visits down to Texas. You'll see some of our imagery associated that we took of the Suez Rajan, both when it arrived at the Gola. You'll see our little UANI Roule in there where our fast boat was involved, and I was honored to be aboard the Suez Rajan. When you pull up to a 900-foot oil tanker, 82 miles out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, and it's rough, and you're expected to climb up the side of the oil tanker, you wonder how anybody can think it's that clever to smuggle this. You shouldn't be able to get away with it because it's so big. And it was quite intimidating when you see this. This is not a little thing.
همکارم آرش علایی که برای پوشش خبری تخلیه محموله سوئز راجان سوار بر قایق اکنون در 100 کیلومتری آبهای آمریکاست. آرش، داستان توقیف این کشتی رو برای ما بگو که از کجا شروع شده؟
در وسط خلیج مکزیک هستیم. بیش از 100 کیلومتر با آبهای آمریکا فاصله داریم و تونستیم با فناوری استارلینک الان به شما ضبط با کیفیت بسیار بالا. خانم و آقایان، این رو در تلویزیون ایران اینترنشنال شما برای اولین بار می‌بینید. پشت سر من تانکر سوئز راجان هست. ابتدا وزارت دادگستری آمریکا خبردار شد از طریق سازمان اتحاد علیه ایران اتمی و بعد هم 1 سال بیشتر طول کشید برای وزارت دادگستری دولت بایدن تا بخواهد بالاخره این نفتکش رو توقیف بکند.
The decision by the Department of Justice was quite effective, and the evidence for that is it prompted Iran to take action or threaten greater action on its own. And here we come to the heart of the matter.
هشدار فرمانده نیروی دریایی سپاه درباره تخلیه و جابجایی محموله نفتی دزدیده شده از ایران در سواحل تگزاس آمریکا.
بزن در رو تموم شد. واقعا اگر بزنن میخورن و منتظر خوردنشون باشن. الان ما اعلام بکنیم اگر شرکتی بخواد این کارو بکنه، ما اون شرکت نفتی که بخواد نفت ما رو از این کشتی خالی بکنه، ما اون رو مسئول میدونیم، ضمن که امریکا رو هم مسئول میدونیم.
Tank series threats, it's really, I think, political theatre, and it's for, deliberately for international consumption. They're threats. So we saw that after the Suez Rajan was seized, they hijacked a tanker called Advantage Suite.
Iranian state media released a video of the U.S. oil tanker that was seized by the Iranian Navy.
این لحظه ورود تفنگداران نیروی دریایی به نفتکشی است که ایران معتقد است تخلف دریایی کرد.
Iran's military has a long history of making tough and often outlandish statements as to their response against the United States, the West, regional neighbors.
Iran is doing that all the time.
This was a real bipartisan push to enforce the sanctions. We got very little response back from the administration. They couldn't really explain why they were not enforcing Iranian sanctions. That's why we had to follow up with a letter then in 2023 to push the administration to do more. We do have to take then the oil that is being transmitted by Iran. We have to follow through with that.
The Islamic Republic's ability to evade U.S. sanctions is very significant for international stability, for regional stability and progress, as well as for U.S. national security.
In September 2023, the US government unsealed the court documents relating to the seizure of the cargo of the Suez Rajan and the guilty plea from Empire Navigation.
The US Department of Justice unsealed the sale of the Iranian oil. Ultimately, the oil from the Suez Rajan was sold for $83.5 million.
Oil was offloaded, it was sent to a refinery and then sold downstream to purchasers. And once that oil was offloaded and sold, the United States government announced the seizure of the Suez Rajan oil and that it was being sold for the victims of terror. It was a very significant moment. Only a few days later, the United States announced that it was agreeing to pay billions of dollars for the recovery of American hostages that were being held by Iran.
The Biden administration has cleared the way for the release of 5 American citizens detained in Iran.
It's very good to be able to say that our fellow citizens are free after enduring something that I think it would be difficult for any of us to imagine, that their families will soon have them back among them.
In exchange, the U.S. will give Tehran access to $6 billion that had been blocked by U.S. sanctions.
This only encourages additional capture of whether it's American citizens or other countries' citizens.
the more funds Tehran has, the more funds it will devote to malign regional aggression, its missile program, terrorist groups, the oppression of its people.
Iran will continue to act in a bad behavior when they are rewarded for their bad behavior.
And in general, you're looking at an engine for conflict, an engine for war.
Meanwhile, more horrifying details have emerged today of the brutal Hamas attack.
700 Israelis are now feared dead. Represents the biggest loss of life in a single day in Israeli history.
One of the grimmest aspects of their attacks was the way children were targeted, many murdered in their homes alongside their parents.
We've said since the beginning that Iran is complicit in this attack in a broad sense because they have provided the lion's share of the funding for the military wing of Hamas. They have provided training, they have provided capabilities, they have provided support, and they have had engagement and contact with Hamas over years and years.
Islamic Republic recognizes the limits of its capabilities, but also recognizes the utility of proxies such as the Houthis, the Iraqi Hezbollah actors, Lebanese Hezbollah, or other terrorist groups to conduct these actions.
As our cherished friend and ally Israel fights for its survival against the Iran-backed terrorists of Hamas, we will continue to stand up for human dignity and offer moral clarity. House Republicans understand that this moment demands decisive action.
Folks, you just need to make no mistake about it, that this chaos from Iranian-backed Hamas and the atrocities that they are committing, they are being fueled by Biden's appeasement strategy in the Middle East.
What that translates into additional dollars going into the hands of terrorist organizations like Hamas, like the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah. So these are areas, organizations that we need to cut off from Iranian oil and the dollars that flow with it.
The cat and mouse game that takes place in the high seas, whether it's the Persian Gulf or now the Red Sea, whether it's the Straits of Hormuz or the Bab al-Mandab Strait, you're seeing a proxy war taking place between Iran and the West.
Iran has seized an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman and ordered it to return to an Iranian port.
The Iranian Navy has confirmed that it has taken control of an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman.
In January 2024, Iran seized the Suez Rajan, now renamed the St. Nicholas, as it sailed through the Strait of Hormuz.
نفتکش تغییر نام یافته سوئز راجان توسط تفنگداران نیروی دریای ارتش توقیف می شود. این تصاویر همین عملیات است در دریای عمان.
Everybody, I'll be very quick this afternoon. I'm sure you've all seen reports about the Iranians' apparent seizure of a merchant vessel called the St. Nicholas in Marshall Islands, flagged and Greek-owned oil tanker. We condemn this apparent seizure. The Iranian government should immediately release the ship and its crew. These provocative and unacceptable actions need to stop.
When you think about it, absolutely stupid of the owner to even think about sailing there. The vessel was seized.
I don't think we've seen any shifts in Western behavior as a result of Iran's actions since the Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th, just more of a continuation of the same types of behavior.
If we expect to have peace in the Middle East, we need to make sure that Iran is kept at bay.
I think history is going to look back and heavily and rightly criticize those who allowed sanctions to be either relieved or not fully executed on Iran, if only because of the impact it had on the amazing people of Iran itself.
Every vessel that's out there by the Iranians smuggling oil is funding terror proxies. Every one of them. And every person associated with that has blood on their hands. And ultimately they will be held to account.